you all hear me? Yes. All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to APAIT. I am Eric Wat. I'm the Division Director of APAIT. We are a division of special service for groups, and we are really honored that you are here to join us to do some storytelling, some really fantastic drag shows, and most importantly, some really good Filipino food in between. So, before we get started, I want to invite to join us one of our colleagues, behavioral health counselor, AIDS diva and legendary Reverend Valerie Spencer, to do a blessing. Valerie.
How are you? Look beautiful. I'm Reverend Valerie Spencer. I'm also a behavioral health therapist here at APAIT, and welcome to our home. Welcome to World AIDS Day. Give yourselves a hand. And as the minister / therapist of our family, of our village here, I am given the awesome task of blessing tonight's event. Now, I'm a sister, which means that I'm long-winded, and you will allow me that grace, won't you? Today we pause, we yield, we temporarily hold our deepest desires to be accomplished, to be right, and to be active. We stop to acknowledge the overcoming ability of the human spirit. We gather all of who we are just to see the path we have laid behind us and the road we have crossed. Indeed, our Creator has brought us from a mighty long way. Yes. From witnessing the withering of human bodies to seeing the life powerful and far beyond expectation. We have merged from humanity of separation to seeing ourselves as vital and necessary to and with one another. HIV and AIDS has indeed touched the world, yet we are here to bear witness that yes, we have had our grieving, have we not? Yet, we are even more powerful. Communities who have otherwise never spoken to each other now see each other as ally and friend. Resources for healing and well-being are all around, even as there's still yet lack to be addressed and need to be fulfilled. We represent the greatness and the resilience of the human soul. This is a blessed day. We see, we witness, we cry, even laugh. All of our being that is human rises to see all that we have lost and all we have expanded for the good, for this is a blessed day. We will never be the same. Our loved ones have crossed into another level of expression. We have cried our hardest tears, breathed as deeply as we could to summons up as much courage as humanly possible. Through all of this, we are here, risen from deepest sadness, yet smiling again and moving forward. For again, this is a blessed day. We will never forget our memories. We will never forget the sacrifice. We come on this day to lift ourselves, heal ourselves, and raise the bar of service even higher, for this is a blessed day. And so I name this day blessed, blessed for all it reminds us of, blessed for the direction it moves us to build, blessed new horizons to fulfill, blessed love to increase, blessed family to declare, blessed of ourselves to be. This is the day. I name this day blessed, a day of completion, a day of reflection, a day of being. To the Creator of life be the glory, for this and so much more. I name this day great, and I name it blessed. Ashe, and so it is.
Thank you, Valerie. Now I'd like to invite to the stage for a few words our APAIT Board Chair, Mr. Richie Wen. Richie.
Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to APIT as we commemorate World AIDS Day tonight. This year is the 40th anniversary of the AIDS epidemic, and we've come a long way in our fight against HIV and AIDS. Tonight, we're here to show support for those people living with HIV and AIDS, and remember those who we've lost. For those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Richie Nguyen, and I'm the board chair of APIT. This coming year, APIT will be marking its 35th year of community service, and I'd like to welcome all of you to please save the date for our Fashion Show Gala, which will be on June 16th, 2022. I hope to see you there. I'd now like to acknowledge our sponsors who have made tonight's program possible. Queen's Care Foundation, Kaiser Permanente Foundation, The Gas Company, Viacom CBS, Paramount Pictures, Imperial Court of Hollywood, Los Angeles, and last but not least, Robert Berger, who is one of APIT's founding board members. I'd like to thank all of our sponsors for your generosity tonight, and I hope you all enjoy tonight's program. Thank you and have fun.
So I'm going to have my colleagues, our members of our senior management team, Jasmine Creighton and Heather Encisa, who is our director of behavioral health services, join us as we introduce our panel. But just a really quick word that as we commemorate 35 years of community service, APIT would not be here without community. And tonight we celebrate and commemorate many communities, including the communities that we are currently serving, who are homeless and housing insecure, our clients who are part of the LGBTQI2 spirit community that continues to be our primary communities, as well as folks, women, cisgender women who are arrested working at massage parlors and are also victims of human trafficking. We also celebrate the communities of people who are suffering from mental illness and substance abuse for many reasons, whether it's a stigma from LGBTQI, from even the COVID pandemic of last year and continues on to this very day. And of course, the people who have been impacted in living with HIV/AIDS and the many we've lost. And tonight, I'm really excited to join us for members of our community who started APAIT, who started the AIDS activism, Asian and Pacific Islander community members. That is what APIT has become. So without further ado, I'm joined by Heather and Jasmine, our Associate Director, to welcome our panelists. First and foremost, I'd like to welcome to the stage the author of Love Your Asian Body, a longtime community leader and really storyteller of our stories in the Asian community. Please welcome Eric Wat. The island of Hawaii. One of our co-founders has joined us, and he's actually here on a multi-track trip from Hawaii to San Francisco to Los Angeles, and tomorrow he's flying up to San Francisco for another gig. So we're very fortunate to have him with us tonight. One of our co-founders, Joel Tack. Founding board members. Really a critical segment of the AIDS movement, particularly in the Asian Pacific Islander communities, are our women allies. And we couldn't be more prouder to have with us tonight two of them. First, Alice Holm. Please join us. Also joining us tonight, APAIT's first, or I would say our founding women's program director, CARES Food Pantry. me the trouble for saying this real quick. The backstory here is Karen actually met her husband at APIT, and they have one of their kids, Kennedy, up on stage. He's now a teenager. Hi, Kennedy. One of our first ever health educators is also joining us tonight, Noelle Alumin. First ever social media campaigns to really showcase that, we're not a stereotypical community. Asians have sex. Asians are sexy. This is why the book and that campaign is called Love Your Asian Body. One of the original models is joining us tonight. If you want to see his campaign, it's there in the family room. Keith Kasai, everybody. So folks, welcome to our storytellers tonight. I'd like to invite to the podium Eric Wat, Love Your Asian Body author.
There's always so much love at APIT. That's why you all keep coming back. And thank you for there are quite a number of people online too doing this virtually, and I want to say welcome to you all, and thank you for being patient. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the book before we get to the wonderful storytellers. We were in the green room for the last half an hour or so, and they were already talking about a lot of stories. And sometimes I thought, you should have told me that during the interview, so I could read the book. But there's something about being the stories when you put people in the room, the story just sort of like become much more gossipy. So this was a book that I have been resisting writing for a long time. 20 years ago, I actually wrote a master thesis that became a book on gay Asian men's organizing in Los Angeles. And I made sure to stop that history at the beginning of AIDS. Because even back then, I knew AIDS was going to change our community very dramatically. And if I were going to finish or graduate with a master's degree, I need to just stop because I would never finish that book, right? So, and then also the other thing is the AIDS timeline. Really, I felt it got really close to my own coming of age. I felt a bit too close to it. In other words, I knew a lot of people who are in the book, and I don't think I was mature enough to handle the trauma. So, I also told myself that I'm a fiction writer. That that's sort of my passion. I'm not a researcher, so I need to go back to my first love of fiction. Little did I know that I would spend the next 15 years building a career on community research. Actually at SSG, working sometimes with APIT. I literally had to quit my job in 2016. It was one of my dream jobs. I created the position, really, like created the job description, all of that, right? I had to quit in 2016 because I realized that I was never going to get burned out. So I need to quit it to focus on my creative writing. So in 2017, a year after I quit, I finished the first novel, and it will be published a couple years later. But in 2017, I was just waiting through rejections after rejection from agent. It's just the process, right? There's a happy ending. It got published. But in 2017, I wasn't thank you. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. And I didn't have an idea for a second novel. But I was also thinking of movement a lot because if you remember in 2017, we had Voldemort as president. And I thought about the AIDS movement has such a huge influence on me, on my own political activism. But I still had a lot of reservations. Like, am I the right person to write this? And as the time passed, for me to take it on. So one night I was having dinner with a group of gay Asian friends that I've known since college. Some of them are here today. And so I told them about sort of my dilemma, because that's what you do when you have dinner with friends that you've known for 20 years. And they all said, yes, you should do it. And I think part of it, because for our generation, it was such a formative time. And people felt like those stories need to be told. right? Especially from the API communities. So I asked them like, well, how am I going to do it? I didn't have a job. I was working very, very little. I'm not academic. I'm not affiliated with academic institutions. I don't get funding to do research. So they said, do a crowdfunding campaign. So I said, okay, well, I've never done one before, but I'll figure it out. So first, I want to thank my friends who pushed me to do this, so they made this possible. Then I went to Jerry, wonderful Jerry Candelario, and I told him, this is something that I want to do, but I won't do it unless you're also on board. So Jerry jumped on it right away, and he asked, well, what do you need? Well, I told him, well, I don't really want to spend your resources on this project because your resources should be going to the clients. So how about we do a crowdfunding campaign? And he put his staff onto the campaign. And whenever I needed something since 2017 on this project, he would give it. Well, he would ask the staff to do it. In fact, Jimmy, who is here, Jimmy, who helped me with the crowdfunding website, is now behind the camera, so that folks online will have a wonderful experience. So we also got a grant to do a podcast. We did a few community forums the last few years as as I was writing the book. But Jerry was always been there from the beginning. So I want to thank Jerry and the staff. They've been doing so much work today. Thank you so much, Jerry. Online, we're not seeing the wonderful setup that he and his team put together. It felt like a wedding. So anyway, we raised $7,000 from 100 donors in a month from the crowdfunding campaign. So yeah, there are a lot of other people that I need to thank, and I'm not naming each of them. It's on my website. So one more gratitude before I turn over to these wonderful storytellers. I wrote this with a lot of storytelling techniques because in my mind, I knew that I didn't want this to be an academic work. One, because I'm not really an academic. And two, I felt that academic language would dull the anger, the passion, the joy, the humor, the grief that the activists, like the ones on stage tonight, were going to share with me, shared with me. So just so you know, oh, I forgot to say this. We don't have the book today. The book is still at the printer. So I'll share this with you. Chapter 4, where I introduced Joelle Tan, who you hear from. The title of that chapter is Fuck That. I'll let him tell you why that's important. But in other words, I want the readers to hear from their voices. I don't want to speak for them. I don't want to explain them. I just want to share these stories. So I didn't know at the time who was going to publish this because I was hoping that, I know the topic might not be too mainstream enough to get a trade publisher to buy into it. And I don't know if academic press would like the way I was writing it. So I have to say I'm really blessed, and this is my last gratitude, to have found the University of Washington Press, who really understands my vision and my approach, and really honor the stories the way I want them to be told. So I really want to say thanks to them. I think one of my editors is online from Washington. So finally, they say writer is a very lonely profession. I've never found that to be the case. And I never found it to be the case because I was a child of AIDS activism. When I was writing in my first years, I met people like Noel and Joel and Alice and other folks too. It's always been a community. And they taught me how to build community through writing, through art. And this book is really a product of that. So the main event, I'm just going to talk a little bit more. I want to read something from the introduction to get the storytelling started. And I want to call in someone who is very important to this history, who can be here with us physically. And that is Dean Goishi, who is the co-founder and the founding director, who's been director for many years. I haven't been able to include him in any of these events in the past few years because he's now retired with his partner Tom in Florida. He was my first interview. And I want to read from you a short passage about that interview. Just for these presence. In 2017, I flew across the country to interview my first narrator, Dean Goishi. APAIT co-founder and founding director, and is from Florida, where he's now retired. He and his partner picked me up at the airport. On the ride home, Dean, who was well into his 70s, turned to me and said, "I'm afraid you wasted a trip. I don't think I remember that much." When we adjourned to the sunroom at 9:30 the next morning after breakfast, Dean pulled out a pack of Japanese rice crackers from the tiny compartment of his walker, settled in next to me, and began. The memories came in a stream, story after story after story. An hour and a half later, I asked if he needed a break. He said we could keep going. Shortly after 1 p.m., almost 4 hours after we began, I told him I needed a break. We think we forget, but there's another relationship we have with memories between remembering and forgetting. AIDS lived there for most of us. Maybe we could tell the story of AIDS only when we could do it collectively. But this is not just an exercise in nostalgia. I've written this book also for the younger generation of activists. Political realities will evolve, strategies will become outdated, but the creative imagination to always seek a better alternative, the youthful courage to experiment, and the joy to fight for what is right remain constant in any social movement. A heteronormative society severs queer people from our past and leaves us without any tradition, isolated and ahistorical. With this book, I aim to say to younger queer Asian Americans, you're not alone, you come from a powerful lineage. Thank you. Without further ado, these are some of the powerful lineage that you'll be hearing from tonight. Should we see this mic? So, it's very loud. You might have to hold it like this. There's another. Oh, okay, thank you. So I thought maybe we should start by having the panelists or the storytellers introduce themselves by just saying a little bit about how they came into AIDS activism. A few minutes per person. I was thinking maybe start with Joelle because Joelle, you're the first staff. Aaron, you got Aaron next. And then Noel. Oh, Noel's first? Okay, Noel, Aaron, and then keep on. Sorry about that.
Aloha, everybody. Magandang gabi. It's so good to see you all. Some of you I haven't met yet, but I thank you all for everything you do for movement work. I especially want to thank Eric for telling our stories and for Jury and his team. That manifests what we started on a daily basis and has taken it to another place. So thank you to the board and the stewards and the staff of this place. So how did I come into it? I'll just answer really quick and just say, you know, Valerie jogged my memory. And prior to doing anything with APAIT, I remember my first gig was with Minority AIDS Project because I was a member of Unity Fellowship Church. So my first job in HIV/AIDS was at Minority AIDS Project. We're working with then Reverend Bean, who became Bishop, the late Bishop Bean. And so around that time, it was AB 101. For those of you who remember 1990, the big governor's veto that activated the queer communities and got them out in the streets. And that was a seminal moment because that's where I met, you know, one of my dearest friends and a sibling, Rick Parrish, who's the other co-founder of APAIT, along with Dean and a whole bunch of other folks. And we got activated, we got radicalized by that. And so it was the work of working as a Filipino in a predominantly Black organization and coming from that perspective about and seeing where the money was going and where the money wasn't going. And that also helped radicalize my perspective around AIDS is happening in different ways for different communities. So I'm stoked, I am heartened to see that the original DNA of what we'd started back then and our ideas is still in place today, and it's just evident of who's here and who's been in leadership and who's being served. I'll just say this, I think in part, I got involved in HIV/AIDS work because HIV/AIDS movement was started by, led by, and perpetuated by artists and creative people. That artists, these artists like Diep Tran and artists like Ming Ma, artists who have tell the story of culture while doing what we need to do to care for our communities. So if there's anything, I would say that this was a home, at least in the early days, and I think it continues to be a home for artists and Cuerdos. So bravo.
Hi, everyone. This is what I look like. My name is Noel Alumet, and I'm so happy to be here. I look out to the audience and I say, at least there I can recognize some of you because you were in my AIDS education workshops. Some of you were in some of my AIDS workshops. And I came to APAIT. First of all, I started doing volunteer work with the AIDS Healthcare Foundation in one of their hospices. And that was about 1990, 91. And that was an educational experience because the face of AIDS and HIV at that time was primarily white male, right? Gay white male. And I walked into this. I was surprised to see women there. I was surprised to see people of color there. I always told the story about there was a Filipino woman there who looked like one of the aunts who raised me, and I couldn't believe that this is, that this was happening. I went to the LA Free Clinic for their program called Project Able. I'm gonna wait for that to pass. It's reminiscent of the old days, right? Yeah. But it was a touring acting troupe, actually, where we did AIDS education plays for high schoolers and incarcerated youth. And I was working at the fine theater organization, East West Players. I was their PR person. Yes, East West Players, give them a hand. Give them as much support. Asian American theater needs a lot of support today, theater in general. We were doing this play called Accomplice, and there were gay themes in that play. And I said, well, let me contact APAIT, invite Joelle and Dean to come to that. And not too long after, Joelle called and said, there's a job at APAIT. Do you want to come interview for it? Let me tell you about this interview. This was the best interview of my life. They said, this is not a conventional office job. We need you to go to bathhouses and sex clubs and bushes and parks, maybe talk to, sex workers on Santa Monica Boulevard. Are you okay with that? I said, I did all of that last week. So it was the perfect job for someone like me. So, and I'll end with this, I've been doing AIDS work for over 20 years. 19 of those years were with APAIT. Yes.
Okay, let's see. So I guess in the early 90s, I'm an artist by education. I'm from LA, but I went to New York for graduate school. And before I went there, my activism was more around women's issues and issues within the Asian Pacific Islander community. When I went to New York, one of my classmates she had just started an organization, Artists Against AIDS. And she got me into a class and she's like, oh, we should take it because we can get our graduate credit for that. And I think it was called Economics and AIDS. So the teacher was fantastic. She was a part of ACT UP New York, was one of the founders, and a lot of her friends were founders of ACT UP New York. And that's where my AIDS work actually started, just doing needle exchange work, going to different groups at Gay Men's Health Crisis in New York. So, you know, I was getting my master's degree in art and fine art, and then coming back home to LA, friends of mine from undergraduate school were doing volunteer work with APAIT. Terry Osato and my friend Anhe, she was hired as the first women's program coordinator. And when I came back, they're like, oh, you know, we've started this organization and they're hiring, they need people. You know, do you need a job? And I'm like, sure, yeah, I need a job fresh out of graduate school. But it was a way for me to combine, you know, working within the Asian Pacific Islander community and, you know, working within the AIDS movement. And I remember sitting in that interview with Dean Goishi and Rick Parrish, and it was a media position. And have I ever done any of this before? Not really. I did things like related to art, volunteering and things like that. But I'm so grateful that they saw something in me and gave me the opportunity to help. And yeah, it was amazing. So that's my story.
I don't know the order. Hi, everybody. My name is Alice Hom. This is what I look like. I'm going to put this back on. Safety first, right? You know, I think of myself as academic adjacent. I was in graduate school in the early 90s in Asian American Studies at UCLA. And I came to AIDS activism because of Asian American queer organizing and writing about, documenting the histories, herstories, the R stories of Asian American queer people. And talking to Eric was really great because he jogged my memory about this connection. You know, you're a graduate student, you need to make money. So I was able to get a summer job and I got an internship, an arts internship through Arts Inc. And, you know, at that time, it was seen as like, queer stuff is over here and it's white. Asian American stuff is over here and it's about race. And everything that I wanted to do was talk about race, gender, sexual orientation, and bring those things all together because they are, right? We just live these experiences, they're already intersectional. And the internship I got was, I wrote like I want to do this intersectionality work. And so they said, oh, okay, there's a place called Highways in Santa Monica. And they have a festival, and they have a queer festival going on and an API festival going on. And so you want to do both, you know, you be the intern for that. And I'm like, okay, great. You know, so I worked with Dan Kwan on the API festival stuff. And then I worked with Tim Miller and Jordan Pimer on the Eke Helmo Eke Lesbo festival. And there's like, who's this young person who's just really kind of like gung-ho about all this stuff? And Tim Miller and other folks were like big in ACT UP LA. And so I learned about ACT UP LA and I learned about, you know, AIDS activism and in theater and in performance. And I'm like, oh, this is really cool. And I think through, you know, doing that work in LA and sort of getting more known around Asian American lesbian, you know, organizing, Dean Goishi, I guess, heard my name and said, hey, do you want to be on this new organization that we're putting together? And I'm like, you know, young and dumb. I'm like, okay, sure, you know, I'll say yes to that. And one thing that I want to point out is that I hate the notion of first, right? Like, oh, you're the first to do that. And I think sometimes you're really not the first. You're just the first because you might not have known it, because it could have happened already. But the other thing about the first is like, wow, it took so long for it to happen. It makes me sad when I hear about first. But Dean said, yeah, you're the first like Asian lesbian that, you know, is a part of this work. And I was a little sad by that because it meant like, would you not have asked any other like queer woman or straight woman to come and do this work? And I don't think they would have. I talk about this too, and I'll bring it up later, but like Dean is of a different generation than we are. And I think Dean, because of his activism of building Asian American we'll say gay lesbian community in the 70s and in the early 80s, he was burned by Asian American lesbians, you know, calling them out on sexism. And I think at that point, they're like, oh, we're not gonna do anything on Asian American women or Asian American lesbians because we're not that. I'm an Asian gay man. So like this identity politics was playing out in a certain kind of way. And I'm like, wow, I don't need an Asian American gay man to speak for me, but speak with me, stand with me, do something about it. And I think that is one thing that I brought to APIT early on, was like, AIDS is not just affecting gay men. It's all of our communities that are being affected by this. And that's why we were able to have like a Women's Action Committee at that moment, because it's like, oh, until the women came, that was an idea. It was never really there until like there were actually somebody who said, hey, we need to be looking at this. And that started happening. So that's my foray into it.
I'm going to speak aside. Thank you for having me here. It's hard to believe that 30 years ago, or 35 years ago, when I moved from Hawaii to here, that I'd be sitting here tonight. You know, I got involved because I actually was HIV positive. I tested HIV positive in 1985 at the Diamond Head Health Clinic in Hawaii. January of 1986, I moved here. I had no idea what I was going to do. You know, my diagnosis was 5 years. So I thought, oh, I'll live to 1990 and hopefully I'll have a good life in the 5 years. I actually came here with a woman. I thought I was bisexual, and it turned out I was gay. And I soon met up with some friends that were activists. So probably 88, 89, I joined up with ACT UP. I was one of those that was doing the demonstrations, trying to fight for HIV and AIDS healthcare, equal rights. We got some support, but it was difficult. It was scary. You know, there was chances of us getting arrested. I was afraid of losing my job, being out there, but I knew how important activism was. You know, and I'm so grateful that for all of you that are giving for your service here at APIT. You know, your work is so important in providing a space, you know, for people with HIV. And at that time, I also was involved with Shanti. I was a facilitator there and a buddy to a few people, but I facilitated support groups for people with HIV and AIDS. And at that time, there was not a whole lot of treatment. So in our support group, we keep losing people and getting new people and losing people. And it was scary, it was hard, but it was so important for us to support each other. I was also a volunteer for UPLA, for Being Alive. And then shortly, I also met up with Dean as well through my friend Tracy, who worked for APIT years ago. And Dean was so kind and helped and supported me with times when I needed support. But he also like showed me how important activism was. He introduced me to people, and this is how I got involved with the HIV support, peer support network. And I went to colleges and high schools and spoke about what it was like being HIV positive. Because there was not a whole lot of people that were willing to do it, and there wasn't a lot of APIs that were willing to do it. You know, there was that element of shame. I was born in Hawaii, so all my family was in Hawaii, so I wasn't too worried about my family finding out what I was doing. But it actually ended up going back. One of the projects that we did was the billboard, where one of those people
on the billboard was HIV positive, and I was one of the HIV positive on it. And my brother's friend who lives in Orange County saw the billboard, called my brother called my mother, and then my mother calls me and says, "Why are you doing this?" She didn't want me to be out. She didn't want me to be public about being HIV positive. You know, I thought living out here, I wouldn't have to worry about that. But, you know, it was that whole part of her that felt shame that here's her son, he's gay, now he has AIDS. But she asked me, why do you have to do these things? And I said, my answer was, because nobody else wanted to do it. It was scary at times doing, you know, but I just knew how important putting a face on, especially you know, an Asian face, so that people would know that everybody can get it. It's not, at that time when I got it, it was a white man's disease. It was called GRID, gay-related immune deficiency, and you know, of course, I wasn't out living at home, and since I was away, I didn't worry about it as far as what my parents thought. But you know, I was still, I guess there was a part of me that still felt a little shame, but I still pushed forward, did all of these things because I knew how important it was. There was a point that when I was a volunteer, and then in 1995, I became a client. Came down with AIDS. My T cells went to 60. And at that time, I was living with my partner, and I just needed a break from volunteering. You know, I did things in different ways, but I didn't think I was going to make it, but I did. And, you know, through the support of APIT, I had people visiting me. I had therapists come and helping me through the process. And after about almost a year, I went back to work. Things were good for a while. Then I lost my husband. My husband, who I had met in a support group, he was also HIV positive. You know, so for a while, we were both doing well. He was on medication, so was I. I thought he was doing everything right. Then he came down with cancer, and he had passed 8 years ago. And my life kind of switched and got myself into trouble. Right now I'm in a 12-step program, but now it's come kind of full circle because I'm now being of service and speaking at meetings. Also, like of service as the secretary to the district for Smith Anonymous. It's been life-changing, you know? But you know, I never thought that today, and I'm so glad to be alive today, and to be able to thank all of you for your work that you're doing in our community. It's just so important, and I really appreciate all of you, as well as all of these panelists that I've worked with side by side during that time, and it's so good to see all of you here.
I wanted to have a conversation about love your Asian body. It's a great tagline, and I think Joelle, you started mentioning about AD 101. So maybe you can talk about some of the impetus for that social marketing campaign, and then Jerry mentioned that Keith is one of the models. So maybe you can tell us what actually happened at the photo shoot. So, Your Asian Body is the book that we're waiting for, the eponymous to Eric's book, but it was also the name of the campaign that we did. And I think about that happened 30 years ago. And where are we now at the verge of 2022? You still need to love your Asian body. You need to love your Black body, you need to love your parents' body, you need to love your body, because for those of you who lived through that, that was practice for what's happening right now. And on some level, I'm still trying, I guess we're all still trying to figure out what that means. But I will say some details of things that I remember, specific details about Love Your Asian Body. So part of the lore was that when we were doing the early outreach at FACES, which is the Gay Asian Bar, we were handing out New Year's envelopes, those red envelopes, and we were still getting an understanding of what it means to do bar ministry, right? Like how you talk to folks, like what do you talk to folks about? And I don't know how much has really changed since then, but FACES at the time in the late 80s, early 90s, was really about basically a deposit, like white men going there for their Asian and vice versa, right? There was a big market demand for either way, right? Because that was just the generation we grew up with. So it was me and Rick Parrish. The first time I heard Love Your Asian Body, he tells us much better when we were doing outreach, and I probably had a cocktail or two passing out condoms, and he was talking to somebody, and I think from what I can recall, Rick, somebody like an Asian gay man was talking about his troubles with his white man, and he basically, and the prompt was like, what am I to do? And rather than Rick answer, I said, girl, love your Asian body. Love your Asian body and protect yourself. And Rick, being the amazing creative that he is, just picked that up and said, we're gonna do something with this, right? Until it became that. So there's that bit of a memory. And I also want to invite anyone out here who remembers some of these details, because the nature of memory, I don't even know if that's really the way it happened, but that's how we tell it. Okay. The other thing was, I remember that hot ass day. It was, the models were pretty hot. So it was like Anhe and Keith and who else? Justine. Oh my God. And so we're like, are we really gonna do this thing? I'm like, yeah, the white kids are doing it. They're all getting naked and doing all this. And we were very well aware that there was this stigma about either being over-sexualized or completely sexually invisible. So that day, with all those politics in mind, it really just came down to a photo shoot on a hot day with a bunch of kids. And it was fun. It was at Park La Brea. It was on a hot ass day. Rick took any random fabric. So any of that background you saw, that was from like Rick Swap Me Pass. It's some LA shit, okay? And so we did that. And then it was one thing, the comedy of that actual photo shoot, but when the images came back, I remember seeing those proofs, and I saw that it wasn't just Keith or Anhe or any of the folks, but that this was representing something bigger, because it was the first time I laid my eyes. I don't know about first, but I know that in that particular way of something that sex positive, and at that time for us diverse, because it really does bring up this issue of who was there, right, and who wasn't there, because there were also a lot of bodies that weren't there just yet. But I remember that, and then when the cards came out, this is before Facebook. So this is when you had to go to Kinko's and get it printed and do all that, and it meant something to get a flyer. If you wanted to know what to do on LA in the weekend, you had to look at the LA Weekly. And if you needed to get there, you need to look at your Thomas guide. So I'm gonna stop sounding like an old person. But when you see that evidence, that cultural product, right? And we keep saying artists, and what I really mean by that is you don't have to be doing stuff for the stage or the page, but I'm talking about that creative expression, that part of me that actually says, if there's a challenge that seems unsurmountable, you say, fuck that. There's a way around this shit. And this is what artists and creatives do. And I feel that still here, the fact that we have an exhibition, that we have drag artists here, the fact that this has become a platform for that. So Love Your Asian Body was just a moment, but there have been many moments since then. But that's what I remember. I remember Rick's random fabrics, that hot ass day in Park La Brea, and me melting off at the FACES parking lot and all that.
Thank you, Joelle, because I think there's something where you said Thomas Guide, and I don't know if people know what Thomas Guide is, but, or Facebook, like this is pre-internet. And so you have to have things published, printed, hard copy, like hard copy, it's like, okay, wasting trees, but like, that's what it was. And you didn't see Asian bodies, Asian lesbians together, unclothed, on top of each other in mainstream publications that are for queer people. You didn't see people of color very often. So it was huge to see two Asian gay men on top of each other. It was huge to see, naked women together, Asian women together. And that when you see that, you're like, it might be a little more, visible now, but when you have not seen that, you're kind of like thirsting in the oasis of the desert. It's like, okay. It is mind blowing. Like you remember that first, like, oh my God, to see that and say, oh, my body could be that body, or maybe my body's not that body, but that looks hot, right? So I think there's just something about visibly seeing that and seeing yourself reflected is huge. And I think that campaign was tremendous in education.
When Rick and Joelle asked me to be a model for that Love Your Asian Body cards, I had no idea exactly what I was before. And yeah, and at first it started out innocently and we did progressive. But he's right. I mean, Asians weren't portrayed as sexual beings. And at 1990, I never saw Asians in porn or sexual. And so I was excited to do it. Although there was one set of photos that I never saw, and because I noticed the poster on the right of the slideshow where there's the condom on. We actually did a series, or did we, of Eric putting the condom on me? But I guess it was a little risque at the time. It's too late now. We're not putting it up yet. But it's amazing, and I'm grateful and glad to be a part of that. It's hopefully helped a lot of people as far as getting those cards, and whatever it took for people to notice the cards and look in the back and get help. That was the whole purpose of it.
I think it helped me just to be able to see that, like Alice said, right? I mean, understand that sex education up until that point was pretty boring. It's ineffective. It's like name 4 ways you can get HIV and then check the checklist. It was before PowerPoint presentation, so it's even more boring. So I think to have that, to show that like we're in the middle of a sex pandemic and we can still have fun, we can still be joyful. That changed how I look at myself and look at how I look at other Asian men as well. So I want to just acknowledge how powerful that image, or those images were. I also want to bring in, like, this is, none of you all were public health professional. So, and I think public health has always gotten this wrong, right? Because they, even now to this day, in the pandemic, in now current pandemic, that we think that if we give people the right information, they will change their behavior. Right? It's a lot more complicated than that. And I think what you guys did was just so brilliant. And I just wish that like public health, and I think public health has changed quite a bit too. Like AIDS changed the way public health is done in this country. I don't think there's a lot of acknowledgement about that. But in the API community, definitely, I feel like there's so much more public health professionals that cut the teeth on AIDS activism. Right, Lisa Hasegawa being one of them, and she will tell you that, right? But I want to go back to the arts tip. And I remember you telling me Noel is a famous award-winning writer and performance artist. Well, you haven't written in a while, but in the 90s, you wrote your novel while you were APIT. Some of that 19 years, it was, right?
And I remember you telling me that like you were aspiring to be an actor at the time, or actor and a writer at the time when the earlier generation of gay men were just dying or taking care of their loved ones, and you have really no one that can mentor you. Say a little bit about that, like what that did to you as an artist.
Yeah, recently we lost the incredible theater artist Stephen Sondheim. Right, we lost him. It was, oh my God, he lived to be 90 years old. When you think about that, right? And around that time, I got familiar with the producer, choreographer Michael Bennett. If you don't know who he is, he was the creative force behind projects like A Chorus Line, Dream Girls, yeah. That this was a person, as well as other artists, who created work. And it felt like there was this time when a lot of us, probably our age, like we're entering this void of mentors who couldn't mentor us because they were sick and dying. There was not. And I will say this, talk about, the women and their involvement in that movement is that it was lesbian artists. Actually, that was a big part of my development. I have Femi Falayan, the African American, poet writer at the LA Gay Lesbian Center, helped basically navigate my writing career. I mean, she navigated my writing career. And when you think about all the people who passed away, and what makes me sad, Kenneth Turan wrote about this in Time Magazine, all the art that did not get made, right? All the art that did not get made. That same class that I took, one of the reasons I'm a writer today is Joel Tan said, IFM is teaching this free workshop. I said, free? I'll do anything free, And I took it, and from there, words began to come. And in that same class was James Sakakura and Brian Greene, who are dead today. So the people who were in that writing workshop, their voices were cut short, right? And the stories that were not told because of that, right? The stories that were not told, all the work that did not happen. And this particular writer was talking about why did the art scene somehow spur the AIDS movement? It was because so many of our friends, so many of us were dying in it. Well, who else is going to do it? Who else is going to do this movement? Except for artists, and that there were people, when I did hospice work, I can't even tell you how many actors and dancers and designers and hairstylists were in that hospice. And one of the reasons they were in that hospice is because these were people who were 20s, 30s, 40s. They did not have the kind of life where they can build retirement, you know what I'm saying? So a lot of us, there were these young artists with who hadn't had a career yet, and they were already dying. And so when I think about that time, I think all of us were artists. I will say, I have posed nude twice in my lifetime, and one of them was for Keith Kasai, who was a painter. So we and I think a big part of us, keeping alive was creativity. I mean, that was the way that we could do this. I did my first, what we called magnet event back in the 90s at a brand new place called the Abbey. Brand new place called the Abbey, when they were nice, when there was a nice community, coffee place, can I throw this event? I want to invite a bunch of artists to come. Joelle read poetry there. The performance artist Denise O'Hara performed there. We had this blessing by a Hawaiian dancer, and that brought a lot of people. We understood, we understood the importance of creativity and art and artists in this movement. Yeah, in this movement. I do want to say, and I hope I'm not outing anyone when I say this, but you have people. I hope you guys are having, for people who are new at APIT or new to this, I hope you're having the time of your life. I hope you're having the time of your life, because, the only time I've ever go danced was for APIT fundraisers. Right? That was the only time, right? That Eric, who's in that photo, is now an esteemed professor at a college I will not name, right? I mean, so a lot of us went on to become like, one of the things that happened for me, I'm going to divinity school and now I'm a Buddhist pastor, right? So if you can imagine, a former go-go boy, like, becoming a Buddhist pastor, that anything is possible. And I know that a big part of our development, at least for myself, was because of APIT and the room that it inspired. I remember my graduate application for divinity school why do you want to do this? And I said, because when I was doing AIDS work, I think faith communities failed in meeting the needs of HIV/AIDS. You know, I felt like, where were all the people with the highest spiritual ideas in the world? You know, where were they? Now there were some great people there. There were some awesome people there. I'm not saying there weren't, but I just felt like there was a space lacking. Well, one of the things that APIT taught me, that art taught me, is to be part of that solution, right? So here we are. Thank you.
Now this is jogging my memory too. I want to just remember, because of World AIDS Day, I was the one who started the World AIDS Day events that we had at APAIT, and I partnered with the Japanese American National Museum at the time. And I would always look to Noel because he knew people in the acting community. Okay, who can we get to perform? Who can we get to? So he was like, oh, try this person, so we had John Cho come out, Lauren Tom, and I remember Tamla Tamita, George Takei, all of these amazing, artists in our community came out and supported it. Amy Hill, she had her one woman performance that she donated proceeds to APIT. So there were a lot of artists in the Asian community that supported us. Maybe I should. No, I should do
I was going to stay with you a little bit, Karen, and maybe switch topic a little bit, because it was really important for me to talk about how AIDS also affected women in this epidemic. And APIT is actually one of the earlier API AIDS organization that has the women program. I mean, Alice can talk about this too, but I know you were a buddy to at least one client who is a woman. Can you say a little bit about the experience and what that's like? Is that okay? Okay.
So working at APIT, everyone wore so many hats. I was doing media campaigns, I was helping on outreach, doing the fundraising, training volunteers, just like everything. And so on the client side, I remember the case manager saying, oh, we're starting to see some women finally coming into services. And there was one woman in particular who ended up coming into the family day room program. And it was, it was odd because she was there and she was you could say like a very typical looking middle-aged Chinese woman sitting in a room filled with, mostly all men, and she was the first one. And from that, she was really fierce, I'd have to say. You remember Juria? Yeah. She's like, I don't want to take EZT, I want to stick to my herbal meds, they're going to be better, So she was always like meeting with people on like, okay, what's the most updated thing? What's the most latest treatments? And from that, we started to get more women, and she's like, where are all the women? I need support. And then we started the support group for women living with HIV and AIDS. So anyway, I ended up being involved with that as well. And we had a buddy program that Tracy Nako was running. He's like, oh, Juria needs a buddy. Do you want to be a buddy? And, so I got involved with that, and just like supporting her through, like realizing that was like the toughest time of her life. She was Christian, she couldn't be open at her church, about her HIV status. Her husband, she was married, her husband, she couldn't get support from him. She was from the San Gabriel Valley. She just felt like, there was no one there for her. And I did the best that I could to provide whatever emotional support I could at the time, and, saw her through actually, the end of her life too, which was really tragic too, because I remember once she had got hospitalized that last time, I'd have a lot of phone conversations with her in the hospital, and I ended up getting sick at the time. I think it was just like a stomach flu, so I couldn't actually go into the hospital that time to visit her, and she ended up passing away. And I remember I went with a couple of other people from APIT. We didn't know at the time, and we went to the hospital rushing over there, and she was already gone. But just knowing that APIT was there in the beginning to, provide services, and I'm so glad that she found our agency to find that support, because there weren't that many women, who were even willing to come out and get services, so they were just dying alone.
Thank you for sharing that. And the API queer women's community was always been integral to APIT's history, right? Like Unhei, some of you mentioned, was the first woman who was hired at APIT. She was also a co-chair of LA API Sisters Lapis at the time, right? And you got referred through her, and also Terry Osado, who's also a very big part of that queer API women's organizing. So I was just thinking about, like, maybe Alice, you can talk about that too, like, how what's co-gender organizing looks like, right? Especially in the previous generation, that didn't go too well. Right? About co-gender organizing.
Yeah, there have been different iterations of API, gay and lesbian groups, from the late 70s on, and in LA in particular, I mentioned, a group called APLG that Dean was a part of, and Eric's first book was about that organization. And APLG was for Asian Pacific lesbian and gays. So there were lesbians who were part of that group, but there's a split because of sexism and the sexist behavior of gay men, and lesbians said we want our own space. So they started another group called APLF. I love the acronyms. So it was like Asian Pacific Lesbians and Friends. And that's of a different generation. And all these groups are like, the friends are always like the white friends, because you could have Asian community, but then you have the, like the white lovers. So Eric mentioned Lapis, which is LA Asian Pacific Islander Sisters. They formed out of, I love this because everything is about generation, like generative stuff. APLG sort of spawns and generates, because of conflict, another group, right? And then that's like a lot of our histories are about conflict and then generative stuff. So I'm not always saying that conflict is bad. I think conflict is good, and that other things can happen because of it. So Lapis came about, and a lot of the folks in Lapis were connected to APIT as well. And so you have that synergy of a nonprofit organization like APIT, and you need community, right? Because if you don't have community, you don't have community organizing, who will be your clients? Who will be your community members? And I just want to say that through APIT, through the Women's Action Committee, there are a lot of young folks who volunteer for the Women's Action Committee, straight Asian teenagers. I'm thinking in particular, a good friend of mine, Noel Ito, like 17 years old, that wanted to volunteer. And that was amazing to me, that there was just such energy and desire to be a part of this educational component, regardless of or even if you're straight, queer, it was just like an openness around that, which I think is huge. And I would also say for the Asian American queer women, like we cut our teeth on sex education. So for a certain generation, I'm like, sex for me is like, oh, we wear gloves, we have dental dams, like it's all about that, so it's like, yeah. And so it's a certain kind of understanding about sex, sexual behavior, and it's connected through AIDS and sex education. So I just want to share that, and we'll go from there. I think there's more people want to share stuff.
I'll start this by saying, thank God I come from the family I come from, because I come from a family where we just love connecting with people and we love convening people. And one of the things that I remember about those times was that it was a movement of artists and friends. So what was interesting is that, Alice is, family to me. Alice is family to me. Alice has known my mother. Alice has spoken. And on some level, these are personal relationships that we've had with each other. And as things we were building things and making things happen, I was starting to come into some consciousness that we represented more than just our relationships, right? And that I remember at the grip of the culture wars where identity, we talked about identity a certain way. And it was a little bit like a bento box thing where this is this, that is that. So intersectionality was always there, but in terms of the language, it was yet pushing up out of the concrete. So my point in that all of it was there was a moment I remember where I first felt that grip of accountability around women, API women, outside of my personal love and relationships with Terry and Alice and all of that. And I remember a moment at a National Gay Men of Color AIDS conference. Some of you who used to go to that. The incredible Reggie Williams was huge in organizing that. And that was huge in terms of forming the idea of the kind of APIT health center it still is today, which is we do this in coalition, right? And at the time, the conversation was among gay men of color. But I was coming from another home, and I remember being in an API conversation with other gay Asian men from New York, Chicago, all the other big cities, and they had their own APATs happening, Apache, all that. And I remember Rick and I fiercely advocating for it. It's not for credit, it's more like, what are you talking about? Like, because there was that idea that, well, we go where the epidemiology is. And we're like, no, you go where the epidemiology is clearly going. And where clearly it's not being met. And that's going to involve women and pediatrics and whole families. And it was a moment. But, we felt passionate about that. And I think partly what drove that was a growing consciousness that we were stepping into, but also in part because we so clearly had community here. It was like both kind of who we represent. It's like, no, that's my home team. And that's how we're doing it in LA. We're doing things in coalition with other communities. And we're looking at epidemiology a little differently. So I'll just say that because I think it was important for us to be able to, discern across the generations. Back then we were like, we don't want to be APLG, fuck that. We want to kind of be something different. And at that time, it was radical. So I guess my question now is, in light of 2022 facing us in the way that it is, what is that movement now? Where does radical live now? How are any of you being radicalized by this? So, and how do you not lose your sense of humor and good fun? So I'll bring it back to that love of family, that it is about creating a sense of belonging with one another that I believe still gets me through today, because we were burying, I can tell you all the stories about burying folks every other week or every week, and that would not be an exaggeration, but we never lost our sense of humor and we're still cute.
I want to start wrapping this up. It's been really, really wonderful. So I'm going to ask each panelist to say a little bit something, last words. And as they're thinking about it, I also want to remind folks that this is a fundraiser. And it's also folks online as well. And maybe someone could put in chat the link to the APIT donate page. That'll be great. I got a question from our old friend Jennifer Sang. Jennifer, my former roommate, Alice, is really good friends with her too. What surprised you about your project book? And I have to say, just to piggyback on what Joelle was saying, that even though it was such a pandemic of so much grief and trauma, the joy is so palpable. As I was talking to these folks, right? It just became actually one of the thesis for my book. It's how we need joy in social movement. We don't talk about joy. we don't talk about the whole person. Like even when a lot of social movements that are very class-based, we look at workers as laborers only, right? And I felt like HIV/AIDS just allow us to be everything that we are. Right? I mean, I kind of knew the queerdos, the freak, and this is what drawn me to the movement, that this is such an inclusive movement that if you're a freak, you still deserve love, you still deserve community, you still deserve treatment. So that I knew that, but just the joy, I just reminded by it as I was talking to each one of you in my interview, that was just so palpable. So I want to thank you for that. I don't know if other folks have questions too. I'm sure the panelists would love to hear from you all. Oh, yes, comments.
I have a all right. Hello again. I just want to give a perspective from someone outside of the hello, old friend. We go back. We were skinny together. Skinny and hot. One of the things that's missing from this conversation tonight is the necessity that caused this conversation to need to take place. At the time in the 80s, the early 80s and 90s, the white gay community really controlled the narrative about HIV and AIDS and made it seem as if the only real activism, the only real progressive action, the only real fundraising need was up toward West Hollywood. That actually created a vacuum that made both API voices and other voices of color need to step up to the realm of activism. First of all, we needed some of that money. We needed some of that AIDS walk and AIDS skip and AIDS hop. We needed some of that AIDS skip to the little money, right? And programs that were being formed were void of API voices and API nuances of living. We all had to step up and be our individual selves and bring that to the table, right? And that's from a sister. Okay.
That is so true. I felt like AIDS infrastructure in LA was a lot more diverse, or could have been a lot worse, but it is the way it is because there was so much coalition building among communities of color. It was incredible when you think about 1992, when LA was known to be like the uprisings, right? You know, racial strife. Folks who are in the AIDS community, the people of color, when they were leading the community, they're actually working together. They have relationship. They speak for each other when someone is not in the room. So there's so much solidarity. And I think APIT today sort of embodies that as well, as Joelle mentioned earlier. Thank you for sharing that. I love it. It's hard for me to see.
So you remember, I love to hear that. Even so good about it.
Well, we do have dinner and a drag show after this, so I want to make sure that we stay on schedule. Any last words? Oh, folks. Just so
So I did want to say something about like how we talk about at that time, it was there's so much grief, you know, because people were dying. And it's like, how do you get through that? You know, how do you, it was just really hard. And like Joelle was saying, that we found like this joy, you know, and you have to laugh somehow. And it reminds me of, you know, I'm studying now dialectical behavioral therapy, and you have the dialectic, you know, you have two opposing things that they exist together. It's like they have to exist together. So I think that that's just, you know, that's just how it was, you know, and somehow when you don't, like, family is always important in the Asian Pacific Islander community, and when you don't have support in your own family, you find your chosen family. And I think that that's so important. Like, that's something I've learned, that the people that that we served, the people that we worked with, you know, we became family. So important. And to continue that, you know, through life, to get through things.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Thank you, everybody. I guess if there was some way I could sort of close off, so this is my point. For this process coming out in me, I just want to just raise the issue of karma. Yeah. The cause and effect of situations. To think that in 25 years, someone might be asking you to talk about the pandemic of 2020. And how will you be able to talk about and handle it? Yeah. We are here today because of a lot of karmic reactions that, you know, it took a lot of people for us to get here, right? Jury leads this organization. One of the reasons why Jury leads this organization, I don't know if you know this or not, was that early on in the 1990s, we were saying things like, well, you know, AIDS is affecting mostly Filipinos, yet we don't have a lot of Filipinos in upper management. Shouldn't we think about that? You know, shouldn't we start training Filipinos to become leaders in the AIDS movement, right? You know, because of that, you know. Love Valerie, she did our very first transgender workshop at APAIT, yeah, very first one. And it was from that workshop that many years later, I did a presentation on Buddhism and the transgender body. Yeah, educating young monastics about transgenderism in Buddhist Sutra. Right. And that came about because of work like Valerie did. You know, because I'll tell you as a young gay man, I'm like, what? Trans what? Why can't there be two genders? I don't understand. There's a lot of education for that to happen, right? So when we think about, let's think about the cause and effect of things. Okay? You know, all of our actions today will affect our tomorrow. You know, will affect our tomorrow. So be mindful about what comes next and what you do next. Thank you.
For be here tonight. You know, I just think for the most part, HIV is no longer a death sentence. You know, people can survive. I was lucky to survive for 36 years. It's pretty amazing. And so, meditation, outreach, your work is so important in our API community, not only for the people, the APIs that are here or that are coming in. It works, it helps. The support and the advocacy that is so important to get people to the right help that they need here in LA is so important. And your jobs will help save lives, many lives. And that's all I can say is, you know, thank you for all of what you do.
There's a question here from Napoleon Lustre, who is a part of APIT. What do people remember as their big successes, accomplishments, but also important are failures? And I think you've heard the accomplishments already, failures, you know, there's fighting, you know, people break up, that lover is back, you know, all that stuff happened. You know, I'm not gonna lie about that. But one thing that I want to bring up, like, thank you to Jury and to the current staff and the staff over the past 35 years who've kept this organization going. And in these different iterations of what it is now, a health center, you know, for not just API folks, but broader, right? Eric, thank you for writing the book. And I can't wait for the book to come out in a few weeks, hopefully. Just buy it, pre-order it. But what I want to talk about is a little bit about what our panelists have just talked about. We've created new horizons for what we can do. Before Dean's sort of generation, we saw like a horizon of how organizing could happen. And I thought, okay, that was a possibility. People did that. And then our generation, we moved that horizon differently now. And I think for the folks who are watching this now on Zoom or for the folks who are here, we have new horizons now. We don't have to kind of do this stuff anymore. There's a new possibility. And I think that's what I want to leave with. And it's like Janet Mobb who said, I don't want to be a role model. I want to be a possibility model. So I'm hoping people think about different possibilities for yourself, because that is happening now with the different generations of activists now. We have new possibilities now, and we don't have to think in old ways. And that's what I love about artists. Artists have a different kind of imagining of what our future could be. And we could have different futures now. So I'm really glad to be a part of it. And I hope that you all just dream big, imagine differently, and have joy while you're doing it.
I really also want to acknowledge Napoleon Lustre, my other brother, who continues to inspire me today. And what a brilliant question. And so I'll speak to the failures. And on some level, I'll tie it into the first question, is what motivated me, because there's a little bit of a full circle moment, because my 18-year-old niece is here, Gemma. In part, it was almost a simple thing. A lot of it's like, I wanted to know. And clearly now in 2022, if she were to ask me, what did you do in that first pandemic? That's, this is in part what we did, sweetheart. This is in part what we did. And we do hope that you now in this moment choose to act, because there's that possibility. But I feel like I'm just getting to now, and it was a failure, or at least a misstep, which was I didn't love my own body, not the way I could. So I thought the idea of service was sacrifice. I'm Filipino, there's Catholicism there, you can figure it out. But here's the thing. We were advocating for loving your Asian body, and we were wearing ourselves out. We were wearing ourselves out. And what that means for some of us, that we were in the grip of crystal meth addiction while we were writing grants, that we were amid depression while we were advocating for more money and telling those white boys they can't have all of it, right? We were dealing with domestic violence and our own confusion about ourselves. But don't get it twisted. The thing about this crew and generation of folks, that they lived all that life, but what we did was that we made our joy and our resiliency our vengeance. That was our clapback. That watch us now. I am healthier now at 53 than I was at 35, than I was at 23. And I hope that for you doing this work amid this pandemic, that you are loving your body for reals. And that means sleep. That means not too much, the right amount of stress. That means companionship, all the things that you cannot take for granted. And let this be the last generation of nonprofit warriors that feel like they have to throw themselves in the volcano, because guess what? If you are working those kinds of hours and make those sacrifices, and you're in a leadership role, or you're not making the best decisions. So let me just say all of this in the way, and I mean this, you are all family to me. I may not know every one of you, but the fact that you are here with this kind of stake is that you are family to me. I want to know, how can I help you? And this isn't just the thing I'm saying up here, for real. How can I help you? We are still here. We are still resources. And I want to thank the current leadership and the staff doing this. Mahalo nui, salamat.
Can we give these folks another round of applause? Now you understand when I say I didn't think there was a book that I wanted to write, but it's a book that I needed to write. The book is not out. I felt like it's false labor, but but it will be out soon. It's somewhere in the printer. But we do, if you order from the University of Washington Press, I'll give you a discount. I think there's a flyer somewhere around here with a discount code that you can get 30% off. And for those who are online, we'll make sure that we email that information to you. So I'm going to turn it back to Cherry. Thank you.
Thank you, all storytellers. Before we get up to dinner real quick, I just want to make a quick comment and piggyback to what Alice was talking about, that, you know, this movement, this activism, it doesn't end here, it didn't start here, it's going to continue. And I want to acknowledge the people who actually put this event together, our wonderful team, our great team at APIT, and in particular, two folks I want to highlight, if they can come up, if they can hear me, Joshua Teodoro, Joshua, as well as Deja Irving. These are the co-chairs and future, come on up. I want you folks to get credit here. This is, you know, future leadership, a fellow Kababayan Filipino. I know Josh, your mom is here, right? She make, all right, her mom's on her way. And Deja, I don't know where Deja is. But again, this is an amazing group of future leaders, whether it's going to be at APIT or where they're going to go. We're just really proud of the work you all do and you're going to continue to do in movement building, wherever the next iteration is. So with that said, thank you all so much. This is just, oh, there's Deja. Come on up, Deja. Dinner is served. There's cocktails in the back. If you haven't had a chance to actually go to the family room, which is the art gallery with some of our consumers and staff, please check it out. That's where you can see the Love Your Asian Body campaign that Keith is starring in. And of course, stick around for the wonderful drag performance. Please enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you so much.